textbook clerk in a large school on Long Island. It is a summer job. This job requires me to count, distribute, collect, and fix textbooks which were handed out to the kids during the school year, district-wide in both public school and private school. One school in the district, Swanaka High School, is significantly larger and older than the other schools. At one point every summer, I am given the master key to every room in the building and told to search everywhere for missing textbooks. When it came time for searching Swanaka, I was used to having to deal with summer school, but this year, due to budget cuts, there is no summer school, leaving the towering building completely deserted, beyond one secretary and a few janitors on the first floor. I was also knowledgeable of Swanaka's past. The school was built during the Great Depression and is full of little nooks and crannies designed simply as an attempt to employ more workers. The school also claims to have been built on an Indian burial ground, and there were times, while working in the library in years before, that I think I saw someone out of the corner of my eye and would get the feeling of someone watching me when no one was around. I did not have this in mind today when I started my annual textbook hunt. The school is horseshoe-shaped, with a large clock tower on top of the third floor that I have never traveled to. I walked into the front and attempted to get into the library on the second floor while avoiding the janitors and having to explain who I was and why I was there. Surprisingly, all the lights above the first floor were turned off, and I had to use my cell phone as a flashlight to see the way. The library door was locked, but I found an entrance through a connecting classroom before finding the master key in the secretary's desk and starting with a cart to collect the books. I searched through every room on the second floor and proceeded into the old shaky elevator, which dated back to the 1940s, to head to the third floor. The elevator was covered by a heavy wood door, behind which was a metal gate but had to be pulled, closed before the elevator could move. Up on the third floor, the lights were off as well, but I began checking classrooms just as I had been previously. I stopped by the door, which I had never been in, the door that led up to the clock tower on top of the school, and decided to try the key, just for fun. Surprisingly, the door swung open and I proceeded inside and up the decrepit stairway. I left the book cart and observed how high I was able to go through the choking dust and excessive filth. I reached the landing on top and saw the tiny ladder headed up to the clock tower, which I declined climbing since it did not look at all that sturdy. I headed back down the stairs and out of the door, which I closed and locked before proceeding on. From this point on, weird things began to happen. My master key did not work in the next 3 or 4 rooms, which was surprising since I'd been in all those rooms with the key before. I finally gained access by getting into one room and traveling to the others through connecting offices. I then proceeded up to the science labs at the end of the hallway, only to find that one door was completely unlocked. This is unusual because every single other door was locked. I got inside and traveled through the back closets for fun to reach the other rooms in the head of the horseshoe. As I traveled, however, I heard the distinctive sound of footsteps behind me, and I paused, ready to explain myself to a janitor. As I listened, the footsteps got louder and eventually stopped where, in my opinion, I should have seen somebody. I remembered the Indian burial ground and my past experiences with ghosts. I'd once lived in a haunted apartment, and I began to grow cautious. I scanned the room quickly and headed back out to my waiting book cart and down the dark hallway. As I rode down the hallway, I heard the footsteps again from behind me and finally assumed that this had to be a janitor. It then occurred to me that the school's 3 stairways were all being redone and that the only access to the third floor was that elevator. I also remembered that I did not close the gate on the elevator, which means that no one would be able to call for it unless they were on the third floor with me. And when I arrived back at where the elevator was, I found that it had been successfully called down and not back up. Since I didn't recall anybody walking ahead of me and the gate was open, there had to have been someone else on the third floor that sent the elevator down. I still had to check half the first floor though, and I began down with my cart. As I got to the far end of the third floor and the last rooms, I approached the cosmetology lab and found myself, again, unable to open the door. I got into the neighboring room and then proceeded inside to a large closet in between the rooms. I saw a door in the distant back of the closet, which I knew connected to the other room, so I proceeded to move the heavy carts and cabinets around in pursuit of the door. As I moved stuff, I heard a loud noise come from somewhere either behind or in front of me, so I crawled back out of the closet to see the room was still pretty empty. I then proceeded forward and got to the door. I turned the knob and pushed it out, only to find that the door didn't budge, so I reached for my key, which I assume must open a lock above the doorknob. After finding that there was no lock, I pushed the door open again and got it open about an inch before it was slammed back closed. I pushed again and put all my force into the opening of this door, finally getting it to loudly swing open. The lab felt eerie, as if someone was in there with me, and I was not able to explain the door's stubbornness, especially after reopening it and closing it several times. I had also realized, as I searched for textbooks in the lab, that one English textbook laid on the floor about 6 feet in front of the closet door I had entered through. Seconds later, I noticed a stack of these English books sitting on the desk closest to the door, and I grew a little scared. I thought that this falling down book was probably the sound I heard. It had occurred to me that I probably wasn't alone in the room, and I calmly grabbed the books and started out the door to the hallway. I put the books in the cart and walked, rather fast, to the elevator before putting the key in to call it up. As I stood walking in the dark hallway, something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye, and I glanced up in the direction of the science labs on the other end. I thought my eyes were playing a trick on me. It appeared that the door to the tower was wide open, at least for that second in time, and as I stood there waiting, it had also occurred to me that I'd be stuck on the third floor if the last person to use the elevator left the gate open, like I did. This would be likely also because no one knew I was around. I stared into the distance at what looked like an open door and thought, just as the elevator arrived. I pulled open the heavy wooden door and slid the gate to the right when suddenly a loud slamming noise echoed through the hallway. This time I knew my eyes weren't playing a trick on me. The door I thought was wide open was, and it had just been slammed closed, as now what I saw in the distance was clearly the closed door. I quickly rolled my cart onto the elevator, jumped in, pulled the gate closed, and hit the button for the second floor. Whatever was behind me in the hallway or holding the door closed, I assumed was probably invited when I opened the door for the tower. Soon after, I called my boss and told her about the event, and she was shocked, saying, if that was me, I would have left the second I heard footsteps. I then spoke to my coworker who had done this school with me the previous year. When I told him about getting into the tower room, he replied, the master key doesn't open that lock. I tried. You can't even get a key in that lock. He then went on to say that it was painted shut even. But whatever or not he's telling the truth is beyond me, since I am 100% positive that I was in that room today. Thank you for reading my long story. Hope you enjoyed it. This is quite a story, so bear with me if I make a few mistakes or become a bit vague. I went on a ghost hunting expedition with a friend who I've previously mentioned in other stories. He is a great believer in the supernatural. I took some convincing to get to come along, as I don't enjoy getting scared out of my wits. But as I've said before, I seem to be able to see or feel things other people can't. My friend seems to think I'm psychic, but I hope I'm not, because it's a pretty scary gift to have, honestly. Anyway, I was convinced to come along to a night vigil my friend was conducting. We went to Warwick Castle, which is near to where we live, and we pitched up for the night in the supposed ghost tower. Note for the future, I was wearing a gray t-shirt with a picture of the Muppet animal. A lot of things happened to us in that tower. There were 5 of us in total, including my friend and me. I hated every minute in that tower. We heard noises, shouting, scratching, saw light anomalies, and felt temperature changes. But around 3 o'clock, I was left on my own to see if I could contact anyone who was there. I did. A girl. I didn't intentionally ask her to come to me, but she sort of just appeared. She was dressed in period clothing of around the 20th century. She can't have been much younger than me, about 14 years old, but she scared me. She felt angry, like something bad had happened in her life. She disappeared and we ended the vigil for the night. We got a taxi and went home. I kept asking the cabbie to turn up the heating because I was freezing and felt uncomfortable for the whole journey. I got back at about 4 in the morning. Needless to say, I slept like a baby. I'd only been sleeping an hour when I felt someone sit on my legs. I thought it was my brother messing around and I told him to get off. But when I looked up at the person, it wasn't my brother. It was the girl from the ghost tower. She looked at me intensely for a few minutes and I just stared back at her in pure horror. She had followed me from the castle. But then before my eyes, her face seemed to morph into the face of an animal, the face of the t-shirt I'd worn that night. I was so frightened. Then she just disappeared, just like that. She vanished and I haven't seen her since that night. This was at least 2 months ago. Just thought I'd share it with you though, seeing as I promised to. Thanks for reading. This experience is very recent and most details of the spirit's appearances were unfamiliar to me, making description difficult. I attend Garin Tower, which is situated outside Carlow on the coast road on the way to Lorne. The building is a large mansion built in the style of a typical medieval castle, which had come back into fashion in the late 1800s. The owner of the castle was named Frances Anne Vane. When she died, it was then passed on to her son, who had no love for the building and neglected it. At the event of his death, it was passed on to Vane's grandson, Winston Churchill. Being the Prime Minister, he had no time for the castle, so it was donated to the British tourist industry, which transformed it into a hotel. It was then devastated by fire and was later turned into a school, which it is today. In its long history, many tragic deaths have occurred, including students who've thrown themselves off the high cliffs over the seas which the castle overlooks. I'm a student attending the school, and this was the week of the end of term examinations. Our exam center was situated in the old castle, as it is named now, since there are modern school buildings attached to the original structure. I was presently seated, furiously attempting an English examination on the 9th of June at approximately 11 o'clock when the oddest thing occurred. A strange hovering face appeared over the shoulder of one of the teachers and presently moved at apparently random motions around the room. I was astonished that only I could see the face. It then began to approach me and then disappeared into thin air. After the exam had concluded, we left and I saw no more of it. At lunchtime of the 14th of June, I was sitting with my 2 friends in the old garden of the castle when a woman walked with an odd spring to her step. She was wearing odd clothes, a white gown-like thing with a strange monet and all manner of strange old-fashioned garments. She walked straight through a group of boys who did not see her but looked over their shoulders at something they felt but did not see. She too vanished as she neared us. I researched any sightings of white woman ghosts in Garin Tower, but found none, but I was sure I saw one. The final specter, which calls my school his home, is a well-known figure, commonly known as the Black Butler, since his surname was Black and his occupation was butler to the patrons of Garin Tower Hotel in the early 1900s. When the fire started, he was confined to his tower quarters and he was forced to jump out the window for his life. He later died of his injuries from the fall. There are many variations of the story. Nobody's quite certain if that is how or where he died. I was doing a geography exam. Since it was such a small class, they sent us to the drawing room, an outstandingly beautiful place and a well-known hangout of our subject spirit. I began the exam, and the typical exam time hush ensued. I was concentrating to the best of my ability when something caught my eye, moving in the corner of our room. A man dressed in an old-fashioned tuxedo was sitting cross-legged on the chair. His figure was blurred and distorted, but he stayed there for around 5 minutes. His form then faded into nothingness. When his form appeared, a strange cold crashed through the room. It was a very hot summer day. It made the other students and teachers look around. That is why the form vanished. I concluded from the style of the clothing that it was the Black Butler.